Hi and welcome. In this video I'm going to be performing an electrical upgrade on our 2024 Thor Compass 24 kV RV. This RV initially came with a 100 amp hour lead acid battery, and I wish to upgrade to a 230 amp hour lithium battery setup. In order to do so, I'll have to remove the lead acid battery as well as other components relating to the lead acid, which is a Trombetta, Solenoid, and Intellitec bird, and these will be replaced with a DC to DC converter. I started off researching and made this diagram for my electrical upgrade. I purchased most of the components on Prime Day several months ago and waited till now for the weather to get a little bit cooler. Now we're into third week of September here in southern Arizona, and we're only starting to get weather below 100 degrees. So let's get started by removing the lead acid battery and the components associated with it. The battery compartment in our Thor Compass RV is underneath the steps, as you can see here. So before removing everything, I'm going to disconnect the battery from the RV at the disconnect switch here. To remove the battery, I'll be removing the negative terminal first and then the positive terminal. And for safety, I'll be using safety glasses and electrician gloves. For the terminals on here, it's number 14 socket, so I'll start by removing those. Remove the strap holding the battery. So here's the negative battery cable, which I just removed from the lead acid battery. Thor put in 2-gauge wires here, so I will be replacing these with 2-aught cables for the higher current draw potential of the 2000 watt inverter that I'll be adding. Next I'll do the positive terminal. As you can see, there's several wires there, and we're removing them all, and then later they'll be replaced with the new battery. Now I can carefully remove the lead acid battery. The compartment here is quite large as it goes in there, and there's room for 2 100 amp batteries, or in my case I'm going to put a single 230 amp battery. So here it is below the RV at the battery box. Above here there's a ground terminal, and then there's 2 12-volt terminals there, and there is the solenoid, which I have to remove. So I've made some labels when I start to remove the cables that I can label, because there's some going to the coach battery and some wires going to the chassis battery. So I'll start by removing some of these wires. To make things a little bit easier, I'll just remove all of these zip connectors. So now I'll start removing the cables from the solenoid. You can see here, this one will be the coach and it has a red wire, small red wire also. This one is the chassis with the red wire, so I did make some labels which I'll put on so I don't get anything mixed up. Try to figure out later what they actually are, but for now I'll just label them. So now I'll start removing the cables. I believe the big nuts are 13 millimeters, so I have that wrench ready to go. So we remove the ones that are from the coach. I've labeled that wire. Now I'll remove the one from the chassis, which is still live. So I'll label this one as chassis battery. And as mentioned, the other wire is live, so I'll make sure it doesn't touch anything. The last two wires to remove from the solenoid is this yellow, which I believe is the ignition wire, and a black ground wire. So I'll remove those now, and then the solenoid can be completely removed. The solenoid is now removed, and we won't need this anymore. Next component to remove is the bird, which is in the battery box. Looks like it's 1 bolt to disconnect. Here's the bird component that was removed from inside the battery compartment. So its wires is going to this cluster here. So I'll just remove the protective sleeve and disconnect the wires that are no longer needed. Now looking at the bird for the definition of the wires, the orange is ignition. So that orange goes through this yellow, so that'll be ignition, so I'll label that one. The red was power, so that was just going to the coach battery, won't need that one at all. The white was coil power, so that was connected to this yellow, so that one we won't need. And then the black is ground, so I don't know, I'll connect it to ground anyways, but we don't need it going to the bird. Now I'll just cut the wires, label them, and tape up the ones that are not needed. So before installing the battery in the RV, I want to fully charge it first, because they say before adding the battery shunt, the battery should be fully charged. So I'll do that now. I'm hoping to be able to use the DC to DC / solar controller to do this. We'll see if it works. I'll be connecting up the solar panels. I just use a little connector here for the solar. And then I'm going to add some of these terminals to the wires and then connect up to the battery and see if it'll work with my portable solar panels. So I'll get started with that. First thing is, I guess this is the output, so I'll make that a red heat shrink. Add that on. This will be the first time I do this. I did purchase this tool on Amazon to put the connectors on, so we'll see how well that works. So first, to strip the wires, of course. Then this will go in, and this into the tool. And make sure it's in there properly. And then use the hammer. And it looks like it's in there nice and solid. I'm not going to do the heat shrink just in case in the final I cut these leads. I don't know, but that'll do for now. Do the same thing for the ground. Put a black heat shrink on that one. I guess they're big enough they could go on after. Another terminal. I think the wire's just a little too long. Do it again. All set properly. Now it's nice and secure. For now, that's all I need is the ground, the output, and the solar. So next I'll get the battery going. I do have a inline fuse, so I'll connect that to the positive. 13 millimeter. The output will go onto that. And then need a negative, so I'll just cut a little piece of cable, solar cable, to go from there to there. I mean, I don't want to waste a connector, so I'm just going to cut it along and wrap it around. So, wrap this around here, just a temporary thing. And then the ground, the charge controller. Guess just to be safe, I'll use my gloves. And eye protection. So now I'm all set up. Like I said, the blue light represents lithium, so that's ready to go. I'm all hooked up. I am going to take this outside where I have some portable solar panels, and we'll see how it does charging, and hopefully it'll get to full charge today. Here's my 600 watts of solar power, which I'll then connect up to the battery and solar controller. So now I'm set up outside under my patio, and I'm going to connect up to solar now. Solar's hooked up, but nothing happening. Okay, the issue was an over voltage on the solar. With the 3 panels, I was getting too much voltage, 69.7 volts, I think it was. Now with 2 panels, I'll reconnect. And then I think you just have to wait a little bit. Okay, now it's flashing, now it's solid. So now we have PV voltage. Wait for the app to update. So now with the 2 panels, says I have 32.8 volts. It's bulk charging at 2.05 amps. So now we'll just let it go through the steps. So it's charging. And once it's fully charged, then I'll take it in the garage and I can start the installation. The battery's fully charged now, so now I'll go back into the garage and continue with the upgrade of the battery and DC to DC converter. Now I'm going to install the Renogy DC to DC converter with MPPT charger. I chose this one because it has a waterproof rating IP67, so I can mount it outside this box. There would be enough room to mount it inside, but I think I have better ventilation on the outside. So I'm going to put on the outside of the battery box around there. So I'll just have to place it, drill some holes, and install it there. So I'm going to be installing the DC to DC converter about here, underneath the RV on the back side of the battery box. So mark the hole, drill, and install it. 4 holes have now been drilled, and I put in the bolts from the inside. Now I'll go underneath and install the DC to DC converter using washers and lock washers, and I'll probably put a little bit of Loctite too. So here's the DC to DC converter install behind the battery box. Next, I'm going to install this fuse holder. I gotta place it probably right around here, and so I'll just need to drill 2 holes to install that. Next step is to install the 60 amp circuit breaker. I'll be putting it right around here, so I just need to drill 2 holes to install that. Just gonna put it upside down, just like the one Thor put in, because of the terminals. The top is the auxiliary and the bottom is line in. For the auxiliary battery connection, I think I gotta drill a 1/2 inch hole right here so I could just pass it through there. So I'll do that now. Here's the hole for passing some of the wires through. Started off with a small drill bit and then a 1/2 inch drill bit. Now I'm going to use a step bit to make it about 1 inch, and then I'll install a rubber grommet just to be so it's not sharp edges on the wires. So now going to connect a 60 amp breaker, so I have the output of the DC to DC converter connecting up to this terminal, and I'll place this up there and we'll get on to the next step. Here's a relay mounted to the side of the battery compartment. Before installing the battery in the RV, I'm going to do a little bit of prep work. First is the shunt. I have a 8-inch piece of 2-watt cable. Will go from the negative to the battery plus of the shunt, and then from the shunt will be the 2-watt cable for the ground terminal. So we'll do that first. And then that cable to the shunt. And as mentioned, the shunt is directional, so there's a B for the battery negative and P to go to the ground of the RV. So here's the ground. Next, the shunt also needs a connection to the positive. So there's a little terminal here. They supplied you with a little screwdriver. So we'll connect that up. Tighten it up. Nice and snug. First I'll put the positive cable and then the shunt cable. Maybe I'll shorten this later. Just make sure the positive and negative don't touch over there. Here we have the display, which we'll just see if it works now. other end to the shunt. And now we have a display. It says 13.3 volts, everything's 0, so probably have to calibrate this. I guess it helps read the instructions. Setup says that you do need to find out the resting voltage, which is the fully charged voltage, which I did measure, and it's 13.3 volts. But then after connecting up the shunt, you need to discharge the battery until it stops working and put it aside for 30 minutes. And then you charge, and then the display should read 100%. So I need to discharge the battery now. Luckily I did buy an inverter, which is going to be the second phase of this electrical upgrade. So I'll need to connect that up and discharge the battery. And then I guess I'll wait till everything's installed in the RV to fully charge the battery. So in order to drain the battery, I'm going to connect my 2000 watt Bouge RV inverter. So for safety, I will wear the safety glasses and electrical gloves. First connection will be the positive cable. The gloves are a bit bulky, so I'll just take it off to do this connection. In order to pre-charge the capacitors on the inverter, I'm going to be using a 25 watt 30 ohm resistor. This will prevent a spark from happening. So we'll connect that to the negative cable. And then the other side to the negative terminal on the inverter, and just need to do that for a few seconds. And now when I connect the negative to the terminal, there shouldn't be any spark or anything. Okay, so now tighten up the connection. Now we have that connected. Just check the voltage. At 13.3 volts. And we'll be using my heat gun just to draw some power, and then maybe the radio longer term. And I'll turn on the inverter. Everything looks good. Got a green light for power. And we'll see how it works. And it's running. So now I'll just let that run for a while and to drain the battery, and then we'll be ready to install it in the RV. So the shunt is showing a current drop of 131 amps. Voltage went down to 12.7. I guess that's probably normal. The amp hours on the battery went from the 230 to 227. Now we're at 99%, it says. And we'll see how long that takes. So the battery monitor is showing 131 amps being drawn. Using my meter, showing 129.3 amps. So it seems like it's relatively accurate. So far we're down to 87%. So I didn't feel too comfortable letting the heat gun run for so long because it is taking a while to do 230 amp hour battery. So I connected up a portable AC unit, and that's drawing around 132 amps. So we'll let that run now. So it took about 2 hours for the inverter to shut down. It's beeping right now, but the power output is off. You know, here does show 3% left. I'll just let it go, see if it goes to 0. I think it's just the voltage is too low for the inverter, but there's still some draw from the battery. Then it says to let it sit for at least 30 minutes. Here where I live, the temperature went up again September 28th, and it's supposed to be a high of 112. So probably get back to it tomorrow morning when it's a little bit cooler. And that'll be the next step, is to install the battery in the RV. This morning I'm going to install the lithium battery in the RV in the battery compartment under the step. I've just connected the battery monitor and the positive cable so it doesn't touch anywhere, leaving the negative. That should not be an issue. First I'll add the straps for the battery hold down. And then I'll drop the battery into the compartment. So here's the battery installed and strapped in. For the next step, I'm going to add the 2-aught ground cable to this terminal post. I'll be removing one cable, which was a smaller gauge, and then I'll add the positive 2-aught cable to the 12-volt post up there. So I'll do that now. While connecting the ground terminal for the battery, I'm going to install a second one for the future inverter. Stay tuned in a future video for that install. The positive 2-aught cable and the negative 2-aught cables are now connected, and I've passed the wires up to the battery box. I also put some dielectric grease on the terminals. Here is the positive cable connected to the inline fuse. Also connected the other 12-volt cables that Thor had put. One is the Go Power MPPT controller, and the other one, I'm not sure if that's the slide, but anyways, the same connections as Thor did at the positive terminal, as well as, of course, the positive for the shunt. I've turned on the battery disconnect so that now, even though the battery is kind of discharged 11.7 volts, we can see that the BM Pro is now powered up. RV Master app is running. You can see the coach battery 11.7, so it measures that. That's good. I think I need another connection for the Ford chassis battery to read, but we'll do that later. In the solar controller settings, I need to change the Go Power chemistry from existing gel to lithium. So Life P04. And the battery size would be 230 amp hour. The converter on our 2024 Thor Compass should be automatic. At least that's what the documentation says. So hopefully that'll be okay. I had already connected the brown wire from the controller to the circuit breaker. Now I'll have to connect the auxiliary battery or chassis battery from the Ford to the other side of it. After that, I'll be working on the solar connections, and then it'll be the starter battery cable to the inline fuse and to the battery. To be safe, I'm going to put some tape around that terminal of the live chassis battery. Like I say, the chassis battery is under the driver's seat in the Ford Transit van, and I'm not really sure how to get at it right now, so I would have liked to have disconnected at that end, but just to be safe, I'll tape it so it doesn't touch any metal. So all the connections have been made inside the battery box.
Next step is to install the solar connections. The battery did fully charge with the converter fairly quickly, averaging about 47 amps. So I'm going to disconnect shore power shortly, and then I'm going to let the battery drain a little bit, and then tomorrow morning I'll do the solar connections and make sure the solar controller portion of the Renogy device is working properly. For the solar, I'm going to start by adding this Furrion solar charge outlet to the side of the RV right here. I did go measure inside. This part is hollow, so I measured about 12 inches from the bottom, so I'll be drilling a hole around here, and then this will get connected to the Renogy DC to DC converter slash MPPT controller. So I've drilled the hole, just clean that up a little bit, and then the connector will go in like that. So now I'm placing it so I can mark the holes to drill. Next step is to drill the holes. So I'm now going to connect the wires to the 10 gauge solar wires going into the RV. So I'll strip those wires and use some butt connectors. There are the butt connectors connected to the solar wires. Now I'll connect it to the inlet. Here's a complete connection with the butt connectors. Now I'll use a heat gun just to shrink that. Here's the butt connector after applying heat with the heat gun. So here's the inlet fully installed. I also bought this to go with it from Amazon, so that'll just plug in and it'll go to the solar panels. Next step is to pass these wires underneath and connect to the Renogy DC to DC converter slash MPPT controller. Solar connections to the controller have now been connected, so now I can go and try out my portable solar panels. I have the solar panels connected out in the driveway, and the DC to DC converter is reading 15.6 volts, 21.5 amps. Now I'm going to check the operation of the Renogy DC to DC converter with the alternator of the Ford Transit. So I'll start the car now. Now I think I'll just take a bit of time for it to kick in. As you can see, the alternator is charging at the max of the DC to DC charger at 50 amps, 680 watts. The alternator itself putting out 54 amps, and the DC to DC converter 50.02 amps. So everything's working as it should. Next step is to cut a hole for the display. I'm going to put it below the BM Pro around here, because as mentioned earlier, in the future I want to also put in the inverter and it'll have a display, so it'll go around here. So now I'll have to carefully cut a hole for that. So I've marked a location for the display. I'll first cut the vinyl with the utility knife, and then I'll see about using a jigsaw to cut the hole. In order to get access behind that wing wall, I'll be removing the fire extinguisher. Here's the cutout for the shunt display. I've secured all the wires with tie wraps for now. When I do phase 2 of adding the inverter, I will get some of this cable protector loom or whatever you call it. Now these wires are left over from the original electrical, so I'll just tie that out of the way, make sure I never need it in the future. So that's pretty much it for down below till the next phase. Now I'm going to install the displays. I didn't do that great of a job, especially cutting the vinyl, so I'm going to make a panel plate, and since I'll be adding the inverter in the next phase of this upgrade, I made the hole for that also. So I'll get that plate made, and then we can install
and run the wires for the two displays.
Going now to attempt to run these cables for the two displays down through the wing wall, down underneath the RV. I can see light down there, so I'm going to use the electrical fish to try to do that. So I've got both cables taped to the electrical fish line, and now I'll try to pass it through the wing wall. So here's the wire for the shunt, so I can now connect that up. Shunt now connected again, and I have the other wire for the future inverter display.
One of my neighbors who works in sheet metal made me this plate for the two displays, so now I'll go ahead and install it. Here it is with the two displays installed. Now I just have to drill 6 little holes and put in 6 screws. Here's the panel screwed into the wing wall. Last thing now is to put back the fire extinguisher and tuck in the wires. This now concludes phase 1 of our electrical upgrade in our 2024 Thor Compass 24 kV RV. The install included replacing the original 100 amp hour lead acid battery and replacing it with a 230 amp hour lithium battery from LiTime. With the lithium, also had to add a DC to DC converter and chose the Renogy DC to DC converter / MPPT controller because of its compact size and that it is IP67 waterproof rated as I was putting it outside the battery box. Hopefully you get something out of this video, and if you have a similar RV, I hope it helps you. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series where I will be installing a Bouge RV 2000 watt inverter and integrating it into the electrical system. Thanks again for watching and hope to see you again soon.